Well, I like the imaginary people on the podcast feed way more than I liked real ones. But you can't have the one without the other.
Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe learn a bit about ourselves along the way. My name's Abu.
And with Abu is me. That's a weird way of saying it. Oops.
That's a very Murderbot way of saying it. Like,
That's right.
You're like a Murderbot trying to impersonate a human, but you got
so
nervous,
awkward.
You stumbled along the way.
Oh, God, they're going to know.
I don't
have a governor module. No governor module.
All right, folks. Well, if it wasn't clear from our banter, we are starting a brand new book today. All Systems Red.
That's right.
By Martha Wells. This is the first novella in the long-running Murderbot Diaries series, which we'll talk a bit more about later in the episode. But, before we dive in and get nerdy about it, let's take care of some housekeeping.
So, as always, spoiler warning, we're going to be covering the first 4 chapters of All Systems Red, the first novella in the Murderbot Diaries. As always, we encourage you to read along with us and share your thoughts. You can email us at sci-fi bookclubpod@loreparty.com. Join our Patreon at that same handle, patreon.com/sci-fi bookclubpod. We have free reading guides, discussion questions, a really thriving community on Discord, and you'll join us on Patreon to find all of those clips and bloopers that don't make it onto the main feed.
That's right. Also, a special note here. If you go over to that Patreon, you will see a poll that is live right now about Season 2.
That's right.
All Systems Red is the final book in our first season of the show, and then we'll be taking a bit of a break as we prepare for our second season and our second batch of books, and we need your help in deciding what those books should be. So head over to the Patreon. It's free to sign up, it's free to cast your vote, and it's free to help us decide what books we all, as a group, as a book club, should read together next season.
And of course, you'll find all of the links that we just mentioned in our show notes. So if you didn't catch them now, you can find them there later.
That's right. Okay, with housekeeping out of the way, the game plan for today's episode is straightforward. We will begin by summarizing chapters 1 through 4 of All Systems Red. Then we'll each share our first impressions and perhaps even predictions of what we think may come in the book. And then finally, we will wrap up by diving deep into our sci-fi analysis of the first half of this book. So before we get to all of that, let's take a quick break. Let's recharge and reboot our governor modules. But don't go anywhere, folks. When we come back, we're getting into All Systems Red.
Welcome back. Let's jump right into our summary of these first 4 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So in chapter 1, we're introduced to Murderbot, and we're told a crucial piece of information. The Murderbot has managed to override its governor module.
Hello.
Effectively giving itself free will.
Whoa.
Which is pretty interesting.
Yes.
The story essentially begins as Murderbot and a few of the scientists it's working with are in the field doing some survey work, and suddenly they're attacked by an indigenous creature.
Uh-oh.
Murderbot, of course, leaps into action, as you might hope, and saves Dr. Valescu and Dr. Bardwaj, extracting them to safety on an approaching hopper.
Yeah.
Back at their habitat, the humans tend to the injured Bardwaj as Murderbot hobbles off to the security room to repair its own pretty horrible injuries.
It lost 20% of its body mass.
Yeah, it's like 20%, don't worry, I'll find a closet and recharge, which is incredible.
Yep.
And to its shock and dismay, I want to be clear, what shocks and dismays it is that the head scientist, Dr. Mensa, drops by to check in.
No!
You know, forcing it to have a conversation. Oh God, no! Please, no!
Please.
And that's chapter 1.
That's chapter 1, really setting the tone and starting off quite explosively, I'd say.
Yeah, indeed.
Chapter 2, Murderbot wakes back up from a bit of a reboot and repair sequence that it was in, and it goes to meet the crew. And rather than putting on its normal armor that covers its face and body, it decides to just wear the regular crew uniform this time. A bit of laziness here on the Murderbot's part. And this was a mistake. The crew is taken aback because of its appearance. Presumably, Murderbot has quite the human-like appearance,
Right.
and most crews in Murderbot's past experience just pretend it's a robot.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of shocking to realize the robot looks just like you and
Right.
walks around just like you in a normal uniform. Now, with the help of Murderbot, the crew does some analyzing of what went down and realizes that the planetary survey data that they've been provided by the corporation that hired them to survey this planet has been tampered with, or it is just like bad and incomplete. Like it's just crappy intel that the company like really cheaped out on, and they just got like the shitty package versus the premium package. And that's why they weren't given advance warning about this indigenous creature that nearly killed Borrowed Watch.
Right.
Now, the only way to actually confirm whether this is some sort of malicious hack, that their data has intentionally been tampered with, or whether this is just like shitty, cheap intel, is to actually go out to one of the survey areas that isn't in the data package and to figure out what's there. Is something being hidden there intentionally? Is this malicious? Or is this just a lazy piece of work?
Right.
So that's what they decide to do.
And throughout this chapter and the previous one, it's kind of running commentary from Murderbot about their experiences so far, which has been pretty great.
Yeah.
But jumping into chapter 3, the crew goes on this field mission, and for Murderbot, he feels this excruciating niceness from them.
No!
And he can barely handle it. Like he's nearly like pulling his arms out of their sockets. He's so uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that is like what's paramount. That's what we're kind of understanding about Murderbot is his like tension and his relationship with the humans in his crew.
That's right.
And as they're doing this, they realize that the maps are completely wrong.
They don't line up at all.
Wrong. They're completely off. And as they survey the missing area, they start to suspect it's probably just cheap, shitty data. Like the company probably just really shit the can here. And
totally.
And it's probably not foul play is their thought, at least at this moment.
Right. Because they don't really find anything out here, outside of just like normal, basic like flora and fauna.
Exactly.
There's nothing like super secret hidden.
Yeah, there's no clear evidence of foul play.
Yeah.
Until later that day, something a little puzzling happens when they suddenly lose all contact with Deltfall, which was the other survey team on the planet. At this point, they think, well, we should mount a search and rescue operation, try to figure out what's happening with our compatriots, essentially.
These goody two-shoes. I love them so much, damn it. So, chapter 4, the operation kicks off. They head towards Deltfall, and there's a bit of a hiccup with the helicopter and the autopilot, but again, probably just a shitty piece of equipment the company cheapoed out on. They ultimately arrive at Deltfall. They arrive to find that the other survey team's habitat is completely abandoned and eerily untouched. Their assumption was maybe the team was attacked by an indigenous creature like they were, but there's no damage at all to the habitat. So they decide to land and investigate what's going on here.
Yeah.
Murderbot very smartly takes point on this mission. He tells everyone to kind of hang back and follow his orders. This is when Murderbot discovers the dead bodies of the Deltfall survey team, littered all over the crew quarters.
Right.
And the logical conclusion here is that they've probably been killed by their own security units who have gone rogue on them. Their own Murderbots going rogue. Our Murderbot does manage to find the rogue units and, in a smart bit of tactical maneuvering, is able to kill them. But out of the blue, Murderbot is incapacitated by more sec units that have come out of nowhere. These were not part of the Deltfall crew. The Deltfall crew had, 2 or 3? And Murderbot was able to confirm and kill those 2 or 3. And now this 4th one and a 5th one shows up out of nowhere. And they surprise Murderbot. They incapacitate it. But luckily for Murderbot, Mensa comes in to save the day at the last minute. Right. And the team is able to extract the critically wounded Murderbot back to the hopper and make it up into the air. As the chapter ends, Murderbot realizes that the rogue units tried to plug an override combat module into it. And Murderbot panics. It orders the crew to kill it before he kills them.
Right.
Murderbot can almost feel the data downloading into its systems.
Right.
It's about to lose control of its own body and go rage mode on everybody in the crew.
Totally.
The crew is like, no, we're not going to kill you. Again, these are extremely lovable, nice people. They're not just going to kill their Murderbot. And they refuse. And in the final lines of the chapter, Murderbot reaches for a weapon, points it at its own chest, shoots, and shuts down as its operations begin to crash.
Right.
Because of the fatal wound. And that's where our reading ends today, on a really dramatic cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Where we have discovered some dangerous shit going on at Deltfall, and Murderbot appears to be dead, or at least shut down in whatever capacity that a security unit gets shut down in. That's the reading for today. What did you think?
This is a pretty straightforward read, and I'm enjoying it. For a relatively short work of fiction, 4 chapters represents half of the book, in fact. And
that's right.
To kind of see what Martha Wells has been able to build in that 4 chapters has been really interesting. I'm enjoying it. I mean, I don't know how you've been taking it in, but I find this to be personally pretty refreshing. Mm-hmm. Especially in between, some of the other works that we're reading, which have a great deal of world building and are kind of rich in so many details. This is much tighter. This is a really tight package. It feels so visual. It immediately, to me at least, feels like it would adapt really well to other formats and media with almost no effort. It translates very nicely to even something like a graphic novel or an animated series.
Totally.
And of course, as we know, a live action Apple series adaptation is in the works. So we'll talk more about that later, but you can clearly see why this series is getting the attention that it is.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think it's a fairly low-calorie piece of science fiction, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
No.
I love eating potato chips as much as I love eating a nice, juicy veggie burger. It's a different flavor, but it's straightforward to your point. I think there are enough breadcrumbs in this mystery that I definitely want to see it to its conclusion. Again, it's a novella. It's not that long. So it's really something you could knock out in an afternoon on the beach if you wanted to.
Yeah, totally.
So it doesn't ask too much of you, of course. I will admit, on a first read, curious if you felt this way, but on my first read of these 4 chapters, I walked away feeling like the plot and the story and the concept were pretty paper thin and frankly a little uninteresting,
Sure.
I wasn't all that invested in solving this mystery. But of course, I reread again the chapters as we prepared our script for our conversation today. And on every subsequent reread, I did find myself enjoying the characters and the subtle world building that's taking place more.
Right.
And kind of allowing myself to just accept that the plot and the concept and the sci-fi of it all is fairly low-calorie stuff.
Yeah, I felt quite similarly. I did enjoy it even on the first read, and on subsequent reads, I think my overall takeaway is that I really don't have much investment in the mystery kind of at play in the story.
Yeah.
Even the other characters in the survey crew, they seem fine.
Right.
And I see in your notes here, I really like how you put it, Murderbot is the star of the show.
Yes.
That is my feeling. That is why I want to continue reading, is because I find Murderbot to be just so kind of droll and funny and this weird cyborg Garfield kind of character, I'll watch him do whatever with whomever. And,
Right.
As other kind of plot elements come in and out of the picture, I'm really just kind of fixated on Murderbot.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. The plot taking place, like events happening, are almost like just a background thing for Murderbot to
Right.
react to.
Right.
You're really here for Murderbot's reaction to it.
Right.
That's
right,
the
right,
entertaining part of the story. He's like really
Yeah.
the star of the show. And
Yes.
I think whether or not you like this book almost hinges entirely on whether you like how quirky Murderbot is. Like, if that doesn't work for you, if that comedy doesn't land for you, if you find Murderbot to be annoying, you're not gonna like
You're
this
not
book.
going to
Like,
get very far.
there's not much more in this book to hook
Exactly.
you outside of Murderbot. Personally, I feel the same as you. I'm loving Murderbot, the character. Honestly, as like a lifelong introvert and shy kid, I can identify so much with a lot of what's going through Murderbot's head and a lot of the like social awkwardness.
Sure.
And the absolute dread of having to hold a conversation with someone when you really don't want to.
Right.
And they're being so nice and you would be the rude one to cut it off.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand that so much.
Totally.
And so I really find myself identifying with Murderbot in many ways. I think I will add that outside of the comedy, there is like a fun bit of drama throughout because we know Murderbot is unique in that it has hacked its governor module and is a Murderbot that has given itself free will but has to hide it. So every interaction also has this extra layer of like, I gotta pretend I'm still like a robot doing my job and not just watching Netflix.
Right.
So it's really funny to see Murderbot kind of like be very competent at its job as a way to hide that it's being lazy in its off hours. I guess that's something else that I identify with strongly.
You can't help but like identify with this being that's caught up in this like on its surface ridiculous situation.
Totally.
Like it's on this survey mission to a planet, but the company that sponsored it cheaped out on every possible cut every corner. And it does not want to be there. It would prefer to be watching Netflix for endless hours, apparently. But it's got also the ability to like kill anybody.
Right. It's effectively using drones and like combat strategy. Murderbot is very effective at its job. And like the self-deprecating humor is almost like kind of ironic and funny because it keeps acting like it's half-assing its job. But like Murderbot's doing great.
Murderbot's
Good
doing
job,
great,
buddy.
In fact. Yeah.
The last comment I'll say on the humor portion of it all, this is really my kind of humor. So I think there's an extra layer of why this lands for me. For me, like sort of the dry, sardonic humor is the thing that always tickles my funny bone. I'm not really like a bombastic, loud, jokey humor guy. Those kinds of things don't necessarily get me. But for example, this quote, this moment made me laugh so much. And it's so dry and so understated. Quote, "There were groans and general complaining about having to pay high prices for shitty equipment. I don't take it personally." End quote. And the "I don't take it personally" in parentheses just killed me.
Right.
So that kind of like really dry humor that's sort of a bit self-deprecating is definitely my kind of humor. So I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'm really liking Murderbot a lot. And I suspect Murderbot, the character, is what will carry me through the rest of the book rather than the sort of paper-thin plot taking place.
Right.
As we wrap up here, do you have any theories on the mystery itself and what might be going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of said it. Like, my only prediction at this moment is that Murderbot is not dead. That will come.
Certainly.
He will return.
There are six more books.
There are many more books in the series. So, I don't know. Like, I didn't find that there was so much that kind of, begged for explanation or speculation from me. And, we've said it. Like, the mystery isn't what's the most gripping kind of component of this particular story. So, not a ton of predictions. I think Murderbot will be back.
I agree.
I don't think it's that controversial.
No, I completely agree.
How about you? Any predictions?
I will say, I think as far as the mystery itself goes of what's going on, On a first read, I was kind of like, what's happening? Is this just like a series of
Sure.
unfortunate events? Like they have shitty
Right.
equipment and the
Right,
robots
right.
are just breaking down and going rogue.
Yeah.
On subsequent rereads, I did pick up on more of the breadcrumbs that make it clear that someone is actually behind this, that this
Yeah.
is nefarious, that there is some sort of intentional hack. And it's clear that the rogue sec units at Deltfall were hacked because Murderbot explains that this like combat module that overrides them responds to commands. It's not just a combat module that makes them go crazy and rage on everyone in the room.
Right.
It's a combat module that gives someone else control of them.
Right. Right.
So it's clear that there's a mysterious figure or group
Right.
operating behind the scenes intentionally.
Right.
They took out Deltfall and are maybe trying to take out our group of heroes as well. Whether that mysterious figure is just the company, like trying to write off a failed survey mission so they don't have to pay fees or whatever, whether it's some sort of indigenous group on this planet that we don't know about fighting back, or whether it's just some sort of like robot revolution where the other robots have also figured out how to overcome their governor modules. I think there's still a bit more of a mystery to unpack here.
Yeah.
And I am interested in seeing who is the mastermind behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've kind of been teasing it up already, but why don't we get into our sci-fi analysis and kind of unpack some of the meta, like who wrote this book, why did they write it, the big dilemmas, and some of the gadgets and leaps that we come across in this book.
Let's do it. After
And just before that, a short word from our not sponsors, from whatever personalized ad you are hopefully getting.
yes. All right, folks, welcome back. Let's get into our sci-fi analysis. We have a couple of segments that we want to tackle today. Since this is the start of the book, we always like to talk about the meta, a little bit about the author, when they wrote the book, how the book came to be, its critical reception, and all of that history. Later, we will talk about the dilemma, what the core crises appears to be at the center of this story, and then we'll also touch on what leaps of science fiction and logic and assumptions the author is asking of us. And then finally, we will wrap up by talking about the gadgets, because we do see some sci-fi gadgets in this story.
That's right.
So to kick it off, let's start with a bit of background on the book and the author, Martha Wells. All Systems Red was published by Tor in 2017. It went on to win the Nebula and the Hugo for Best Novella, among various other awards and nominations.
Very nice.
Jason Sheehan loved the book and wrote for NPR in their review that, quote, "This book is sneaky. As much as you want to think this is just some lightweight little confection made of robot fights and space murder, Martha Wells did something really clever. She hid a delicate, nuanced, and deeply, grumpily human story inside these pulp trappings by making her murderous robot story primarily character-driven." End quote. So a glowing review from Sheehan there for NPR, and in general, from my research, it appears that All Systems Red had a very positive critical reception.
Yeah. We also know, and I'll just note, that Anne Leckie, author of the book that we just completed, Ancillary Justice, is a big fan of Murderbot as well, going so far as to offer her recommendation on its jacket, saying, "I love Murderbot."
So do we.
So do we. So this novella, picking up from where you left off there, Boo, is the first in Wells' Hugo Award-winning Murderbot series, which is a total of 5 novellas and 2 full novels at this time. We'll have, of course, the best reading order for those books, as well as other bonus material available on this episode's free reading guide, which you can, of course, find on Patreon. Go check it out.
That's right.
We mentioned earlier, but the series has been picked up by Apple for a 10-episode adaptation starring none other than Alexander Skarsgård.
Whoa.
And it's directed by Chris and Paul Weitz. So we will obviously be covering the show and the other books in our podcast.
That's right. So interesting. Alexander Skarsgård is not necessarily the picture I had in mind for Murderbot.
Sure. Yeah. Who are you picturing?
I kind of weirdly had, like, I know he's been canceled or whatever, but Army Hammer,
Hmm.
because Murderbot is kind of described as just like the most basic, generically cookie cutter human possible. And so
Right.
I was just like, who's just like the most basic looking, like tall, muscular white guy I know
Right.
who would be
And
like out murdering people?
I don't know. I was definitely myself seeing Henry Cavill.
Another, yeah, giant block of a normal looking human.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's a fan of he did The Witcher, right?
That's right.
Am I
Yes.
yeah, he's The Witcher and Superman. And I think there's something about him in this kind of like Larry David-esque, cyborg role that just seems
Yeah,
so funny to me.
that's true. That's a good one. That's a good pick. Well, we'll have to see how Alexander Skarsgård embodies the role. I'm sure he'll be
Yeah,
great.
totally.
He's a great actor. Returning to our meta, let's talk a little bit about Martha Wells. So, Wells has been writing sci fi and fantasy for a long, long time, long before the Murderbot novellas became a smash hit. Wells was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and got her undergrad in anthropology from Texas A&M. During college, she was involved in sci-fi and fantasy fandoms and was actually the chairman of AggieCon, which I'd never heard of, but a little bit of Googling revealed that AggieCon is this like multi-genre convention that's been held at Texas A&M every year without fail since 1969,
That's awesome.
which is so cool.
Very cool.
And Wells was very much involved in that community and was a chairman for 1 year of that convention. Now, Wells's first novel was published in 1993,
There you go.
and she's been writing professionally ever since. And her work really runs the gamut. She's written everything from tie-in novels for the Star Wars universe to these long-running fantasy series, as well as short stories. And finally, a sad bit of news here. In a June 2023 blog post, Wells revealed that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer, which is so tragic to hear. Apparently, it was something that was perhaps expected, and she had been going through many tests, according to the blog post. So it didn't come as a total shock, but obviously terrible news nonetheless. And we wish her the best.
Yeah. Swift recovery.
Definitely. So that's a little bit about All Systems Red and the Murderbot series and Martha Wells herself.
Well, let's jump into the dilemma. Let's talk a little bit about the spicy crises and questions at the heart of this novella.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we called out a couple things here. I think the most obvious one is the mystery around Deltafall and all of the sabotage or perhaps just equipment failures and shitty maps and other the other assortment of issues that the crews run into.
That's right.
And the question of maybe who's behind this, as we at least know that the rogue sec units had a module that required a remote operator. So there does appear to be at least some person, entity, organization behind some of what's happening to the crew on the planet here.
That's right.
So definitely there's at least this major kind of plot dilemma.
That's right. Now, I would argue, probably more importantly, there's the personal dilemma that's taking place throughout the story, which is explained to us literally in the very first paragraph of the book. Murderbot has hacked its governor module and has given itself free will, basically.
Right.
And rather than going on a murderous rage and killing all the humans, it just wants to stream TV and be left alone. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this adds this like great sense of drama and comedy to every single interaction that Murderbot has with its human crew. It adds this fun layer to even the most basic of interactions.
Yes.
I think digging a little bit deeper into it, thematically, it does also feel like a really strong bit of commentary on how many ostracized people and communities can often feel. And I think all of us have at some point been in Murderbot's shoes and felt this way about ourselves. This quote from today's reading in particular really resonated with me. Quote, "I have too much to hide, and letting one piece go means the rest isn't as protected." End quote.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fear that Murderbot has in the story. if it lets just a little bit of itself slip and even just hints at the fact that it no longer is controlled by its governor module, it risks losing everything, including and up to its life, you know?
Yeah.
That, I think, is a really powerful bit of writing. It really speaks to this idea that, like, anyone, it doesn't even have to be like a deep, dark secret, right? If you're just hiding any part of yourself
Totally.
from society, from family, from friends, for whatever reason, there is this, like, constant anxiety and stress that if you just let a tiny bit slip, it's game over. You're completely unprotected, you're vulnerable, and perhaps the thing you hold dear or perhaps the thing you're holding back will forever be lost to you if you allow that vulnerability in.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty powerful stuff in a story, again, that's
Totally.
like fairly straightforward and basic and not all that deep. This, I think, again, kind of speaks to why Murderbot is such a compelling character.
Yeah, I mean, this like requirement to be always vigilant, you know, in how you're presenting yourself and not leaking something that doesn't align with the persona, the image, the self you've constructed for other people. It's very painful. Like it's clearly something that even for Murderbot, you know, drops its efficiency, causes it to, you know, spiral into this like hole of shame and insecurity and like discomfort and I think that feels so kind of human and familiar, and that kind of humanizing of Murderbot heightens the drama and really kind of speaks to many of us as readers, definitely.
That's right. I mean, Murderbot, Dad, doesn't want to play on the high school basketball team. Murderbot just wants to sing and dance. Okay?
Exactly. You know?
Murderbot just wants to be in the High School Musical with Vanessa Hudgens.
Yeah, exactly. You know? And it's thwarted. You know, it's constantly being thwarted.
Constantly.
That's
right. Yeah, I think it's a feeling we've all had at some point in our lives.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and that's part of what makes Murderbot also so interesting is that it does have feelings. Like, it's clearly not, you know, a mindless automaton. It does have some autonomy. It is limited, even despite its hacked kind of governor module. It still has the limited autonomy of having to work within a group, protect its like secret identity, you know, and it's not in fact all powerful or all knowing. Like it has real limitations. If nothing else, it seems kind of like a cheap model. Like it doesn't seem like this is the most high end, you know, tech out there. It sounds, you know, more expensive than some, but it's not like top shelf, you know, like this sec unit is like, it's middle of the road, you know, as far as equipment goes.
Exactly. Almost, dare I say, like all the rest of us. Yeah, we're all kind of floating somewhere in the average, right? We're good at some things, we're bad at other things, and we just, we do our best.
Yeah.
And Murderbot's out here doing its best.
Yeah, Murderbot or mediocre bot. I mean, you decide.
Wow. Absolutely savage. I like to think I'm exceptional bot, but I know deep down I'm also mediocre bot, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. I think the only other dilemma that kind of caught my attention in the book so far, it was the mention of corporate confederations. And there's not much that's said about it, to be fair.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know, it'll come up again in subsequent chapters. But there was just like one kind of almost throwaway line, and I'll read it here. Quote, "Freehold meant it had been terraformed and colonized, but wasn't affiliated with any corporate confederations." And that, to me, was intriguing because that's something that I think I see a lot of in science fiction. It's like this question of like, as we leave planet Earth, you know, and the question of like land ownership becomes galactic. Like, who owns this plot of land on Mars? Like that's a question, obviously, that we haven't really quite adjudicated. And I think the speculation around like in the future, maybe corporations are the new kind of governing body. Like, I think we're seeing hints of already. And so it's like whenever I see mentions of these like mega corps, it always kind of pricks my ears.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think a lot of science fiction leans on this trope because it feels like reality, or at least the reality we're living in now, where mega corporations seem to run so much of our lives in the
Right.
world. And so it would make sense that that translates to space as well in a
Yeah.
hypothetical future
Right.
where we,
Right.
as humanity, cross the stars.
Yeah. I pledge allegiance to Ford and Tesla.
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, let's talk about our next segment here, the leap. We like to analyze when we begin a story what leap of faith or leap of logic or leap of science fiction or assumptions the author is asking of us as the reader, right? Because so
Right.
much of science fiction does ask us to take this leap of faith, to buy in to the story or concept or idea that the author is exploring with their sci-fi. As far as All Systems Red goes, I will say it's probably more of a hop
Yeah.
and less of a leap.
That's right.
That it's fairly straightforward and standard sci-fi fare, you know? There's corrupt and or inept corporations, as you've stated. There's a survey team on an unknown planet. There's robots that go rogue. There's alien flora and fauna they contend with. It's not necessarily the most high concept setup for a story. To be fair, I don't think it's trying to be. It's not trying to be some like dense, high concept sci-fi. The strength of this story, as we've mentioned in our discussion already so far, lies almost entirely in its characters and, most importantly, on the charming and awkward Murderbot.
Yeah.
That's what the story is sort of selling us on, and it's less about the sci-fi concepts or ideas.
Totally.
And honestly, what I'll say, like more so than the sci-fi, like all of this is like very standard sci-fi stuff. The thing that's almost hard for me to buy in on is just how competent and how truly kind and nice
Right.
and honorable this crew is. Like they're
Yes.
like, we have to go save Deltfall. Let's everyone fucking go. No one pushes back and is like, I don't want to get eaten by some crazy monster out there. Like I'm hanging out at base.
Right.
They're also like lovable and good,
Yeah.
quote unquote, that it's almost
Yeah.
unbelievable. They're like they're like caricatures of
Right,
the good
right.
guys.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's the part where I'm kind of like, okay, well,
Yeah.
sure.
That's fine. Yeah. Funny enough, I mean that's Murderbot's commentary as well. He's like, this is bizarre. Like there's no infighting. They seem to be getting along just fine. There's not much drama with this crew.
Yeah.
Like his like running commentary is like, well, they're kind of fine, you know,
True.
until they like start to converse with him, and then he's like, oh, this is the worst thing I could possibly experience, you know.
True. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't disagree with you there. There's not a ton that we're kind of being asked to like completely upend or like suspend our disbelief in. The one thing that for me is a little bit of a leap is that there is this cyborg, you know, android, humanoid, you know, being, and it spends just hundreds of hours of time watching soap operas and like other casual media, which like, you know, don't get me wrong, great content, you know, 10/10,
Yeah.
drama in a soap opera, well worth watching if that's your shtick.
Right.
But it's a little bit of a, okay, like, I guess I'll buy this, you know, because like at the end of the day, like mass media, creative content, like the things that we produce, like our cultural artifacts, they convey social norms and values and raise or answer cultural questions, and
Yeah.
they're just like deeply human experiences that are relayed in, you know, metaphorical and symbolic dramas. What would Murderbot get out of that? Like, it's that part to me is like, I don't know. Like, even if I had a computer that was trained to like, you know, process videos and great reams of text, the program has to be for a purpose.
Yeah.
Like, you write it, and there's supposed to be an input and an output. And like in this case, that just doesn't actually line up. Like that equation doesn't hold.
Right.
And it's such a minor leap. Like if we're already in this universe, like, yeah, okay, sure. I guess the android also is like enamored with Love is Blind, you know,
Yeah,
or
totally,
whatever,
totally,
whatever the
totally.
case might be.
Yeah, that's a good point. If I were to theorize and try to answer your question, I suspect watching the TV shows is twofold for Murderbot.
Yeah.
One is what it is for people as well, a form of escape.
Sure.
Murderbot's out here on a job, and it just needs time to turn its brain off
Right.
and relax. 2, we're told multiple times in these opening chapters that Murderbot isn't given like training.
Right.
It has like a shitty, cheap education module.
Right.
It doesn't know a lot of things.
Right. Right.
And so a way for it to learn more about the universe and things and humans is maybe to consume TV,
Yeah.
to
Fair
learn
point.
more about things it doesn't know. And to its credit, it uses that, right? When it is fighting the rogue sec units. It does this like strategic maneuver with its drones and the way it covers the field and sneaks up behind them. And Murderbot tells us that it's not a combat bot of any kind.
Right,
It doesn't have any actual combat training.
Right.
It's
right.
just copying what it saw in like the crime dramas
Right.
that it's been streaming or or
Right.
the war dramas that it's been streaming.
Right,
It's just like
right.
copying things it saw on TV
Yeah. Yeah.
in real life. So
Which is hilarious. I mean,
hilarious.
I cannot wait to watch the Apple series kind of adaptation of this. I really hope they play up the humor of some of these elements.
Certainly.
This like notion of like monkey see, monkey wield machine gun and take out other rogue sec units is like what an incredible
Yeah.
bit of storytelling there.
Absolutely. So those would be my 2 theories as to why Murderbot
Yeah.
is like obsessed with watching TV.
Right.
Again, very similar to why humans might, to learn more about the
Yeah.
world around it and to be able to turn its brain off after a long day of work, doing a
Right.
job that it doesn't want to.
Right. I mean, to be fair, if there were any aliens out there monitoring life on Earth, they would be so confused because we simultaneously have the knowledge and the power
Yeah.
to break an atom apart and harness all of the energy
That's
that comes out of that.
That's right.
But what we spend the vast majority of our time on
Yep.
planet Earth doing is streaming content and watching on the internet pornography. Like that is the vast majority of human time is spent
That's
in
right.
these two realms, and it is bizarre. I mean, like for any outside observer, it would be like the human race, totally a bizarre species, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Are we so different from Murderbot at the end
Are
of the
we
day?
so different? That's right.
Okay, one more segment to go here in our sci-fi analysis. At the start of every book, we also like to talk about the gadgets that we're
Yeah.
experiencing. A lot of science fiction stories will have high tech and gadgetry, some of which is plausible and perhaps even in our real world today, and others that are purely fictional. In All Systems Red, we once again sort of get like the classic gamut of sci-fi gadgetry, right? We have humans with implants and interfaces. They all use some sort of like interconnected internet thing
Yeah.
to talk to each other and reference data and archive data. We also get a throwaway line about clones and Murderbots potentially partially being created with cloning technology.
Right.
There's laser weapons. The Murderbot's got a full arsenal of like laser guns and rockets and shit. There is also a tiny hint at wormhole traversal. So we have some sort of faster than light space travel happening here.
Right.
There's also, and this one's very relevant to the modern day, but the corporation basically has 24-hour like Big Brother surveillance on its survey teams through
Right.
its Murderbots. Murderbot is watching and listening and recording to everything happening on base at all times.
Yeah. As is the hub, like the base's
That's right.
hub computer.
That's right. Anything the corporation is sending you, it's of course collecting data. And then that data, we get this joking bit of information in the story, but Murderbot makes it clear that that data is mined for advertising and
Right. Right.
and the
Right.
companies.
Well, of course it is.
Of
Yes.
course it is.
Yeah.
And everyone basically knows it, and there's nothing you can do about it. It just is what it is. You accept those terms,
Right.
much like we do today when we use technology.
Yeah.
And beyond the technology, there was one line that hints at sort of where humanity is culturally in this universe. In reference to one of the crew members, Murderbot notes that they have either some sort of like polyamorous or open marriages situation where they have multiple kids with multiple partners. And that just seems to be like a normal, that's a normal thing. No one is commenting on that or making it a unique situation. So there is a bit of a hint about where humanity might be culturally speaking.
Yeah. But I will say, like, it otherwise sounds like culturally, socially, we would recognize these people. Like, they
certainly
otherwise kind of appear to have all of the same kind of classic dynamics and like social relationships that we're accustomed to today.
Yeah.
So if I had to speculate on when this takes place, I mean, they do have faster than light travel, like with wormholes.
Right.
Obviously, they've got like highly effective, like working neurotech and like implants and cyborgs. That doesn't feel necessarily like it's a million years away in the future.
Certainly not.
I mean, if anybody's paying attention to what's happening with Neuralink, which I know we neither endorse nor or reject on this channel, but
right, just an indifferent no comment on that. For now.
Indifferent no comment, but it is something like that is happening today, like in corners of the market.
Definitely.
And so I don't know, like I don't know what you kind of thought based on the gadgets that were revealed and like the social and cultural kind of elements that were kind of teased out in the first 4 chapters here, but it doesn't seem so far off in the distance, like less than 1,000 years is like,
sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like
for sure. I agree. Less than 1,000 years for sure. I would wager, honestly, this is a couple hundred years in the future, maybe.
Couple hundred, yeah.
2,200, 2,300.
20, yeah.
I think this feels very plausible for not so far into the future, at least on a typical timescale for sci-fi stories.
Right.
I agree. The tech is not so implausible, and much of it we're either already working on today or already have in some capacity in our lives.
Yeah, totally.
So not too far in the future, I would wager. But we aren't given a timeline. We can only speculate.
Yeah, at least not yet.
Not yet. Question for you. Would you get a neurotech implant?
Literally immediately.
Oh, really?
Literally without hesitation, qualm, question.
Interesting. Wow.
Literally immediately. Like that is, I mean, childhood dream is to be Cyborg from Teen Titans. You know? I want to go all in. Okay. There's no question about it.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean,
no hesitations, no fears. You'd be like, put the chip in me. I'm ready.
Presuming like that the tech is there, the tech is like more or less ready. There isn't, organ rejection. Like it doesn't kind of pop out like I think is what's happening with the Neuralink right now. It's just like the brain is just like rejecting it.
Right.
Because the way I see it is basically like the bottleneck for information communication. I can only speak at a certain speed. I can talk faster. I can type at a certain speed. I can try to type faster.
Yep.
But there's always like a ceiling you hit and how fast you can like communicate information.
True.
And if you had something where you were like directly jacked into the matrix, but suddenly it's like
the literal speed of thought is how fast you would be able to operate.
Exactly. It's like fiber optic for humans, and it's like, oh my God, do I want fiber optic for humans? Sign me up, FiOS, please.
Wow, interesting.
Human FiOS. I am ready for.
And even in the story, there is like a different level to how well the characters can operate the internet and the interfaces, right? Like,
right.
The humans just kind of use like touch interfaces or whatever, just like normal holographic computer things.
Yeah.
And then there's that one crew member who has some basic implants, and he's able to sort of move faster.
Totally.
And operate the tech faster. And then Murderbot has all the implants just built into its body.
Right.
And is the most effective, can do everything like X times faster than any other human.
Totally.
That's kind of the point you're getting at there.
Yeah, that's where I fall. I don't know how you seem skeptical.
I'm certainly skeptical. I'm certainly not ready to put chips in my body yet.
Yeah.
Even those like simple, I'm sure you've seen just like people implanting NFC chips into their hands.
I had not seen that. That's ridiculous to me. That's wild.
It's like really freaky, but it's just like NFC chips so they can do things like wave their hand and get into their office at work or whatever.
Oh my God.
Or so that they can just like pay Apple Pay or whatever with their hand.
Yeah.
Even that, I'm kind of like, ew. Like it's like not that hard for me to get my key card out to get into the office. Like
totally. Yeah.
I don't need to implant some shit like into my hand.
Yeah, so I can open a door. Like,
Yeah.
give me a key for Christ's sake. Like,
So I'm certainly, those are very basic implementations. I'm certainly against
Yeah.
those.
yeah,
It would have to be a very strong cell. I think for you, the ceiling
it's lower.
is much lower.
Definitely.
For me, the pitch would have to be very compelling,
Yeah.
and it would have to fundamentally change my life in ways that I would think would be better for me to be like, okay, implant this, because like, wow, quality of life, quality of productivity, quality of like happiness, access, human connection, whatever, all the things that technology provides for us, that would all have to be way better. And not just like, oh, there's a chip in my hand, so I don't have to get my keys out to get in my apartment, you know?
Yeah.
That to me is silly and not enough of a sales pitch to be implanting things in my body. Ultimately, like humans are already implanting things in their bodies.
Yeah,
like
totally.
medical surgeries,
Exactly.
artificial hearts are being tested.
Totally. Yeah.
There's already plenty of like metal shit and artificial shit that we put in our bodies all the time.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of like accepting how advanced that is and how much control it has.
Yeah.
I do think we'll get there. There will be a future where humans are in very like cyberpunk ways merging much more dramatically with our technology.
Yeah.
It will just be, I think, a bit of a slow change as we accept that socially.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I think even technologically, like, I don't think we're close enough. Just like speaking from like an engineering perspective, it would be frightening, absolutely terrifying to me to imagine that there is software embedded in my body that can do, who knows what, that is like connected to the internet. Like as soon as it becomes networked, it's like, I'm sorry, that is something that to me feels like very implausibly far away, because we're not good at like securing our email logins.
Totally.
So that's the part that to me, like, I am certainly not comfortable with. And I basically don't think it'll happen in my lifetime that I'll ever be able to like really see and experience myself, like this merging of, the machine and the human in any kind of significant way. Because it's like there's so much work that needs to be done to make it just secure. Like if nothing else, just to like ensure that this thing that is connected to other devices cannot be compromised. That just feels like a lot. There's a great deal of work for that.
Right. I mean, kind of the magical thing about the human body is like it's mostly a closed system.
Yeah, totally.
Like outside tampering usually requires like actual physical contact.
Yes.
And can't just be like done from 100 miles away.
Right.
But if like the chip in your brain behind your eyeball is connected to the internet, someone around on the other end of the globe could fucking hack your shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Certainly.
suddenly you're watching ads, all day for some reason. It's like, I can't skip. I keep trying to hit skip.
Then it becomes a Black Mirror episode and you're like, you're absolutely fucked.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Well, we've fallen down that rabbit hole and clearly have a lot of feelings about it, but that's sci-fi, baby.
That's sci-fi.
Sci-fi is all about those rabbit holes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's wrap up today's episode then. That's All Systems Red, chapters 1 through 4. Again, short book. That's the first half. And so, dear reader, for your next assignment, just finish the book. There's only 4 more chapters, 8 chapters total. Right. So make sure you've read all 8 chapters and you've completed the book for our next episode. And of course, you can always keep up with the reading schedules and know the reading assignments and the due dates and what books for reading and what chapters to read by following our schedule that is always linked in the show notes below. So check that out, bookmark it, and read along with us. Another quick reminder, this is the last book of season 1.
Say it ain't so.
It's so, Opsa. It is so.
Oh, no.
But we do have a poll that is live and up right now on Patreon where you can go and vote for free to help us build out the schedule for season 2 and figure out what books we should tackle next. So please go vote. We want your input so that we can be reading the things that you want to be reading too.
Well, friends, what can we say? We're horrifying podcasters, and you know it, which makes both of us even more nervous.
That's right.
So please just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and end this awkwardness for us both.
Please. It's getting so awkward. We didn't want this conversation to happen in the first place. But while you're here, I suppose you should also check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, don't talk to us about our feelings. The idea is so painful that our podcasting efficiency drops to 97%.